A flour mill in California has been grinding grain since before statehood, using the same granite stones and the same wooden chute it always has. By law, it had to stamp every bag unfit for human consumption, not because the flour was bad, because the grain touched wood instead of stainless steel, and nobody updated the rule for 150 years. Your great-grandmother's kitchen ran on dozens of practices exactly like this one, quietly legislated into a gray zone while nobody was watching, by agencies that had never once visited a working farm. Some got banned outright. Some got taxed into oblivion, one excise rule at a time. Some just got buried under so much paperwork that doing them legally now costs more than the thing itself is worth. We checked every single one of these against the actual law, not the rumor. 41 of them. Let's start. Number 41, water glassing eggs. Your great-grandmother kept a 5-gallon stone crock of sodium silicate solution in the corner of the pantry every spring, submerged fresh, unwashed eggs in it, and pulled them out 9 months later, still good enough to scramble. The USDA published the method itself in 1918, 1934, and again during wartime rationing in 1942. Today, the same agency's official guidance says don't do it. Research dating back to the 1940s found the eggs go watery and the method is unreliable outside true refrigeration temperatures. And there's a catch that makes it nearly impossible to even try. You can't use store eggs anymore because USDA mandated washing strips the natural bloom the entire method depends on. The agency that taught the trick quietly made the trick impossible to perform. Number 40, the dirt floor root cellar. A dirt floor in a root cellar isn't a flaw. Extension agents still recommend it today because the natural ground moisture keeps humidity exactly where potatoes, carrots, and cabbage need it to sit through a winter without rotting or shriveling. Your great-grandmother's 800-pound cellar worked because of the dirt, not despite it. Nobody banned root cellars outright. What changed is more boring and more total. Any food stored for sale or barter outside your own household now falls under commercial storage regulations built around concrete floors and electronic monitoring, rules a packed earth floor was never designed to satisfy. The cellar still works exactly as it always did. It just can't legally feed anyone but the family that built it.
Number 39, the roadside honor system stand. A folding table at the end of your driveway, a coffee can with a slot cut in the lid, tomatoes priced at whatever your neighbor felt was fair that Saturday. In most states, this is still completely legal today. No business license, no permit, no inspection required to sell raw produce off your own property. The trick isn't that it became illegal, it's that almost nobody believes that anymore. County offices field calls every season asking whether a card table needs a license, and increasingly the caller expects to hear yes, even when the honest answer is no. The honor system didn't get legislated away. It got talked out of existence by a culture that now assumes everything requires paperwork first. Number 38, hand-tanned deer hide. Brain tanning a hide using the animal's own materials, its brain matter or wood ash and bark, and working it soft over a beam for 3 days is still completely legal for your own personal use, exactly as it was 100 years ago. Trade or sell that finished leather, though, and you step into a patchwork of state disposal rules covering tanning byproducts, rules that vary wildly by state and were never written with one deer and one family's fleshing scraps in mind. Compare that to commercial leather, which is tanned in chromium baths that produce some of the most polluted industrial wastewater on the planet, much of it now offshored overseas. Your grandmother's hide was a closed, biodegradable loop. The industry that quietly replaced it isn't. Number 37, backyard meat smokehouses. A small wood-fired smokehouse tucked in the corner of the yard still has no federal rule against it whatsoever. The agency that inspects commercial meat plants doesn't regulate backyard smoke at all, and never has. What can actually get you
is the same thing that gets brush piles and bonfires in trouble. Local nuisance ordinances, triggered the moment a neighbor in a denser subdivision decides to call it in. Rural smokehouses ran for generations without a single complaint, simply because there was no one close enough to smell the smoke or mind it. The practice itself never changed. The distance between houses did, and that distance is doing all the regulating now. Number 36, the community brush pile burn. Raking up deadfall every spring and burning it to a satisfying pile of potash for the garden. There's no federal law against this at all, and contrary to what most people assume, most individual states don't ban it outright either. It's almost entirely a local matter, county by county, season by season, often tied to drought conditions or wind warnings, rather than a blanket prohibition anyone wrote down once and forgot. The unintended consequence is real, though, and it's the opposite of what you'd expect. Unburned brush has piled up for decades across fire-prone regions of the West, and when wildlives finally do start, they find far more fuel waiting for them than they ever would have a century ago.
Number 35. The hand-dug well. In 1925, a man with a shovel and a hand-cranked windlass could dig his own well 28 feet deep, line it with field stone, and have clean water for the next 80 years without a single bill. Today, the legality of doing exactly that depends entirely on which state line you happen to be standing on. Missouri exempts a landowner digging on his own property from needing any permit at all, so long as basic well regulations are followed. Arkansas, by contrast, requires a full contractor's license and a separate certificate of registration for the identical work. There's no national rule here, just 50 different answers, and most people never discover which one applies to them until the shovel's already in the ground.
Number 34. The spring house. A stone structure built directly over a cold-running spring, shared by 3 or 4 neighboring farms, kept butter and milk at a steady 50 degrees year-round for the cost of nothing. Building any structure over a spring or natural waterway today generally requires a federal wetland permit under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, because the statute defines waters of the United States broadly enough to catch exactly this kind of small, shared, family-built structure. The structure itself is almost certainly still running, somewhere, on land that's changed hands a dozen times. The structure that once sat over it now needs a federal sign-off most families will never bother pursuing. Number 32. Raw, unpasteurized cider. The 2001 FDA juice rule exists because of real, documented outbreaks, Ohio in 2003, New York in 2004, and it requires real processing safeguards for anyone treating apple cider as a commercial product sold through retail channels. What the rule was never built for is a grandfather pressing 50 gallons in his own driveway and handing full gallons across the fence to neighbors as he always had. Plenty of states still allow on-farm cider sold by the cup directly at the press without triggering the federal rule at all. The real line was never pasteurized versus unpasteurized, it's personal versus commercial, and most backyard press owners genuinely have no idea which side of that line they're standing on. Number 32. Backyard deer processing. There's no federal law anywhere against field dressing a deer in your own backyard, full stop. What exists instead is a checkerboard of county and municipal codes. Los Angeles County and Racine County, Wisconsin, both specifically regulate backyard butchering in their own separate ordinances that have nothing to do with one another and everything to do with whichever local zoning board last touched the nuisance code. One small town in Colorado had to pass a dedicated ordinance in 2017 just to formally allow wild game processing as a home occupation.
Number 31. The communal apple butter kettle. Fruit butters are explicitly, by name, allowed for sale under cottage food law in most states. Pennsylvania lists them right there in its approved category. The real obstacle isn't legality, it's what stands between you and actually selling a jar. Acidified products require pH testing, recipe approval, and a formal process review before you're even permitted to begin the application. Turning a recipe your grandmother eyeballed with a wooden spoon over 14 hours into something closer to a laboratory procedure. The kettle isn't illegal anywhere. The paperwork standing in front of it is steep enough to stop most people long before they get a single jar to market. Number 30. Bartered labor across the fence line. A 1979 IRS revenue ruling holds that bartered services must be reported as income at fair market value, and technically that language reaches your neighbor fixing your fence in exchange for a coat of paint on his shed. In practice, the original case behind that ruling involved a formal barter club where members traded professional legal and painting services through an organized exchange, and enforcement has always targeted that kind of structured arrangement, never two neighbors shaking hands over a weekend project. The law sitting on the books is far broader than anything the IRS has ever actually chased down. Most people simply don't know how true that gap is. Number 29. Saving seed from your own corn. Your grandfather saved seed from his best ears every single fall for 40 straight years without a second thought, and nobody ever questioned it. In 2013, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously against an Indiana farmer who'd replanted seed descended from a patented Roundup Ready variety. The case was Bowman versus Monsanto, confirming that a farmer buying patented seed needs the patent holder's permission to replant whatever it produces, even seed bought secondhand and cheap from a grain elevator. Saving your own conventional seed is still completely legal today, exactly as it always was. Saving seed descended from a patented variety isn't, and the Center for Food Safety estimates over 90% of corn now planted in the U.S. is patented. Number 28. Mailing heirloom seeds across state lines. The Federal Seed Act requires any agricultural or vegetable seed shipped between states to carry a label disclosing purity percentage, germination rate, and noxious weed seed content, and seeds of any federally listed noxious weed are banned from interstate shipment entirely, with zero tolerance allowed. An envelope of grandma's heirloom tomato seeds mailed to a cousin 2 states over, technically unlabeled and untested under that law, sits quietly in a gray zone that almost nobody actually checks or enforces. The whole seed swap tradition survives, in practice, entirely on the fact that no one's looking closely enough to apply the rule to a handful of envelopes. Number 27. Owner-built homesteads. In 1862, the Homestead Act let any citizen claim 160 acres of public land for the cost of a small filing fee and 5 years spent actually living and working on it. The government gave away more than 270 million acres of American soil before the program quietly wound down in the 20th century. Building that same self-sufficient life today runs straight into engineered foundation plans, certified septic systems, minimum square footage requirements, and inspections at every single stage of construction, requirements that simply didn't exist when your great-grandfather built his entire life with nothing but an axe, a crosscut saw, and a horse. Number 26. Hand-built cob and adobe walls. Cobb has no dedicated U.S. building code for most of its modern history. The nonprofit Cobb Research Institute was founded specifically in 2008 because getting a building permit for Cobb construction had become nearly impossible anywhere in the country. A federal model code for Cobb finally arrived in 2021 as IRC Appendix U, but it's entirely optional, and only a small handful of states have formally adopted it so far. Adobe has a dedicated code only in New Mexico. The earth and material that built the entire American Southwest and entire civilizations before it for 1,000 years is still, in most of the country today, a permitting question with no clean or settled answer. Number 25. The clothesline. Hanging laundry to dry in the sun and wind costs nothing and uses zero electricity. and 19 states have passed dedicated right-to-dry laws specifically because homeowners associations kept fining residents simply for doing it. That still leaves roughly 30 states where an HOA can legally restrict or ban a clothesline outright, no exceptions required. More than half of all homeowners associations nationwide are estimated to do exactly that, according to right-to-dry advocates. The line itself isn't illegal anywhere in America. Whether you're actually allowed to use it depends entirely on which zip code your deed happens to fall inside. Number 24. The privy and the lime barrel. A scoop of slaked lime after every single use sterilized the waste, suppressed the smell, and within a year turned the whole thing into garden compost rich enough to win the county fair. Neighbors always knew whose tomatoes had grown in old privy soil. Virginia law now states plainly that an untreated traditional pit privy is no longer legal anywhere in the state. Modern composting toilets must carry NSF certification instead, and crucially, the resulting compost is explicitly barred from ever touching a vegetable garden bed. The exact practice that grew those prize-winning tomatoes is the one specific part of today's composting toilet rule that's now forbidden outright.
Number 23. The pickup truck mechanic. In 1968, a Haynes manual, a torque wrench, and one free Saturday afternoon were all it took to rebuild an entire engine in your own driveway. The 1998 Digital Millennium Copyright Act handed manufacturers a legal tool to lock owners out of the embedded software now running nearly every modern vehicle and piece of farm equipment. Colorado passed the first dedicated right-to-repair law for farm equipment in 2023. In January 2025, the Federal Trade Commission sued John Deere directly alongside 2 states over exactly this practice. The fight your grandfather never once had to think about is still being argued in federal court right now, this year. Number 22. Community hog butchering. 4 families splitting 2 hogs on a single Sunday afternoon sounds like exactly the kind of communal tradition that's been quietly regulated out of existence. It hasn't been. Under the federal personal use exemption, there's no limit at all on how many people can co-own an animal headed for slaughter, and no required minimum portion any single owner has to take home. What actually changed is narrower and more specific. Current law requires the registered owner to do the actual slaughtering, not a neighbor stepping in to help with the knife work, which is precisely why a 2024 bill, the Local Foods Act, was introduced in the Senate to fix it. The tradition itself remains entirely legal. The neighbor lending a hand at the table is the one piece nobody's settled. Number 21. Rendering lard and tallow. Nothing from the hog ever went to waste. The trimmed fat became lard for pie crust and the base for homemade lye soap within the same week it was butchered. Selling that rendered fat is now explicitly banned under cottage food law in states like Oklahoma, listed there by name, right alongside broth and homemade pig skins as a prohibited meat byproduct. You're still completely free to render your own at home today. You simply can't legally hand a jar to a neighbor for a few dollars across most of the country, even in states where the meat from that same animal can be legally sold under a separate exemption entirely. Number 20. Home tobacco patches. Federal law explicitly exempts growing tobacco for personal use from any permit, license, or excise tax whatsoever. You can plant it, hang it in the rafters to cure, and smoke it yourself with zero paperwork involved. Full stop. The actual line sits exactly where your grandfather's generosity always lived. The moment cured leaf is given away or sold to anyone outside your own household, federal excise tax law and a TTB permit requirement both kick in at once. Growing the plant itself was never the legal problem. Sharing the harvest with a neighbor always was, even for something as small as a single plug. Number 19. The hay-stuffed mattress. A federal flammability standard, CFR Part 1633, governs every single mattress made for someone else's bed in America.
but it includes a one-of-a-kind exemption specifically carved out for items never intended for resale or commercial distribution at all. Sleep on your own Homestead hay mattress, and you're completely covered under that exemption, no questions asked. Build one as a wedding gift for your daughter instead, and you've crossed cleanly from personal use into the federal legal definition of commerce, the exact same definition that governs industrial mattress manufacturers shipping product by the truckload. Number 18. Hitchhiking. It's still completely legal in 44 of 50 states today, and there's no federal law touching it anywhere in the country. It became a genuine national habit during the Great Depression, when it was often the only affordable way for an unemployed man to travel and find work in the next county over. It declined sharply after the 1970s, not because new laws appeared on the books, but because rising car ownership and a wave of frightening media coverage recast a generous, ordinary practice as something dangerous almost overnight. 6 states ban it outright today. The other 44 simply stopped using it. Number 17. Raw milk and herd shares. Roughly 30 states allow some legal path to raw milk today, but the actual routes families take to get it are genuinely strange. Several states only permit raw milk sold labeled for pet consumption only, distributed under a commercial animal feed license, even when the family buying it intends to drink it themselves at the kitchen table. Other states rely on herd shares instead. You legally purchase a fractional ownership stake in a specific dairy cow, and the milk you collect each week is framed under the law as your own property, never a retail sale. Idaho expanded its herd share statute again as recently as 2023. None of this patchwork exists because raw milk is simple. It exists because no state legislature ever quite wanted to ban it outright either. Number 16. Backyard chicken slaughter and roosters. Slaughtering your own birds for your own household consumption is fully legal in all 50 states, with no inspection or license required anywhere. That part of the tradition never changed at all. What's still actively contested today is the rooster specifically. Kentucky's 2026 bill protects backyard hens from outright city bans, but the same bill specifically excludes roosters from that exact protection, meaning the quiet, productive half of any backyard flock is now shielded under state law, while the loud half remains entirely at the mercy of whatever the city council decides next. Number 15. Backyard beekeeping. A couple of pine boxes tucked in the corner of a farmyard never once needed a permit, and for generations nobody thought to ask. In residential zones today, minimum hive setbacks, mandatory flyway barriers, and strict distance requirements from property lines are common, and many homeowners associations ban bees outright, regardless of what city ordinance actually allows. A 12-year-old girl in Washington state once had to formally petition her own town council just to get backyard goats legalized again. Beekeepers across the country have quietly run nearly identical campaigns just to keep a hobby their own grandparents never once had to justify to anyone. Number 14. Home distilling. Beer and wine made at home both eventually got a federal carve-out protecting personal use. Spirits never did, not once, not ever. Federal law flatly prohibits producing distilled spirits at home, regardless of what any individual state happens to allow on its own books, with the only real exception carved out for non-alcoholic products like fuel or essential oils, run through the exact same still. Your great-grandfather's still, however carefully it was hidden in the holler, was never legal under federal law for a single day, not even during the long stretches when home winemaking and brewing quietly were. Number 13. Home beer brewing. Here's the part almost nobody on Earth actually knows. When Prohibition was repealed in 1933, the new legislation accidentally re-legalized home winemaking on the spot and simply forgot beer entirely through nothing more than a drafting oversight nobody caught at the time. That mistake wasn't formally fixed until President Carter signed a bill in October 1978. For 46 straight years after Prohibition officially ended in this country, making beer in your own home kitchen remained federally illegal purely because of a clerical accident nobody noticed for nearly half a century. Number 11. Cedar shake roofs. After a devastating 1992 fire tore through the East Bay Hills outside Oakland, California, moved to ban the sale of all untreated wood roofing materials statewide, a law that took full and final effect on January 1, 2001. San Diego County went even further in 2004 with its own local ban, and any wood roof installed there before that date now carries a hard, specific deadline: full removal required by December 2028. That deadline isn't a historical footnote, it's still coming. Somewhere in California right now, a homeowner with an untouched cedar shake roof is genuinely on the clock.
Number 10. Wild ginseng and foraging. National forests generally allow personal incidental foraging of berries and mushrooms without any permit at all. That part is true, and it genuinely surprises most people who assume the opposite. Ginseng is the one major exception carved directly out of that freedom. It's specifically banned from harvest on certain public lands because of just how badly the plant has been overpicked across Appalachia over the past century, a single species singled out from a tradition that otherwise remains wide open to anyone with a basket. The mountain men who hunted wild ginseng for a living 100 years ago would recognize the plant instantly. They almost certainly wouldn't recognize the rule now protecting it.
Number 9. Burying family on private land. Home burial remains fully legal today in 47 of 50 states. Only Indiana, California, and Washington ban the practice outright across the entire state. Several states, including Florida and Virginia, go even further and legally guarantee descendants a permanent right to visit a family grave on land that's since been sold off entirely to strangers. A quiet, durable legal promise written into statute that someone's great-great-grandchildren can still legally find their way back to one small corner of a field that hasn't belonged to their family in generations.
Number 8. Steel jaw leg hold traps. Trapping fur for both personal and commercial use is still entirely legal across most of the country today, exactly as it's always been. What's genuinely changed is the trap itself. California became the very first state in the country to ban commercial and recreational trapping outright in September 2019. Only 10 states currently restrict leg hold traps in any way at all. The other 40 don't touch them. The shift here is recent, real, fully documented, and almost entirely driven by animal welfare concerns rather than anything resembling deliberate suppression of a rural tradition. Number 7. The community burn barrel. Burning household trash in a 55-gallon steel drum was simply how an entire generation in Minneapolis got rid of garbage every single week, right up until 1969, when new air pollution regulations banned the practice outright, including burning paper and dry leaves. The reason behind the ban is harder to argue with than almost anything else on this list. The EPA estimates a single household burn barrel can produce as much dioxin as a full municipal incinerator processing 200 tons of waste in a day. This practice didn't get bureaucratically smothered by accident. It got banned because the actual science genuinely caught up with it. Pattern interact. We're past the halfway mark now. Here's the one that surprised our entire research team the most. Number 6. Historic gristmills. The Bale Grist Mill in California, a working water wheel mill older than California statehood itself, was required by law for decades to label its own freshly ground flour unfit for human consumption, not because anything was actually wrong with it, but purely because the grain made contact with a traditional wooden chute and an original millstone instead of stainless steel processing equipment. It took a dedicated 2013 state law to finally fix that one narrow exemption. In North Carolina, two still fully operating 1880s mills, Mingus and Francis, remain legally barred from selling the cornmeal and grits they grind on site, full stop, regardless of cleanliness or quality. Number 5. Herbal remedies and home tinctures. Growing and personally using your own medicinal herbs is completely unregulated in America today.
They're legally classified as dietary supplements rather than drugs, and federal law leaves genuine personal use entirely alone, no permit required anywhere. The wall appears the moment you try to share or distribute them at any real scale. Most states simply don't allow dietary supplements to be manufactured in a home kitchen at all. Production legally has to happen inside a certified CGMP-compliant facility, a financial and regulatory bar so high that many small herbal producers have simply closed their doors rather than try to meet it. Number 4. Barn raising. A barn raising was the original American mutual aid system. Your labor, freely given today, repaid eventually in somebody else's labor down the road, with no money and no paperwork ever changing hands between neighbors. Today, a volunteer who's genuinely injured helping raise a barn typically isn't covered by workers' compensation at all, and the homeowner who simply accepted that free, generous labor can be held personally liable for medical costs that easily exceed the entire value of everything that got built that weekend. The tradition itself was never outlawed by anyone. It got quietly priced out by the very same liability system that now governs everything else in modern life. Number 3. Antique and black powder firearms. This one runs in the completely opposite direction from everything else on this list. Any firearm manufactured before 1899, along with black powder muzzle loaders incapable of firing modern fixed cartridges, is explicitly excluded from the federal legal definition of a firearm altogether. No background check, no dealer paperwork, and in most jurisdictions, not even a prior felony conviction matters at all. It's the single item on this entire list that survived completely untouched by a century of regulation, sitting quietly outside an entire system that was built almost entirely after it.
Number 2. Running the full system at once. A composting outhouse, a hand-dug well, a root cellar, and a backyard smokehouse. Running all 4 together on one piece of property is still, piece by piece, technically legal almost everywhere in the country today. What's changed is that no single permit, no single inspector, and no single agency covers the combination as a whole. Each individual element answers to a completely different code, a different office, a different set of forms, and a family trying to live the exact way one did in 1925 now has to satisfy every one of those separately just to stand still on their own land. Number 1. The owner-built life itself. Every single trick on this entire list points back to the same underlying fact. None of them stopped working. The well still finds water exactly the way it always did. The cellar still holds its temperature through the coldest month. The mill still grinds flour into something a person could genuinely eat if the law standing beside it would only let it say so out loud. What actually changed across 100 years was never the knowledge itself. It was only ever who got to decide whether you were still allowed to use it. None of what you just heard required a hidden conspiracy to explain it. Most of it was an accident, a forgotten beer law nobody caught for 46 years, a flour label nobody bothered updating for a century and a half, a permit system that grew one small rule at a time until the whole structure stood taller than the practice it was ever meant to govern in the first place. But here's what remains true today, right now in every single case. Every one of these still works exactly the way it did 100 years ago. The well still finds water, the seed still grows true. The knowledge was never actually lost. It's only buried under paperwork nobody bothered explaining to you. Pick one, just one. Go find out what your own state actually says about it, not what everyone around you simply assumes is true. Tell us in the comments which one you're trying first and which one your own family quietly still does to this day. Thanks for digging into the past with us.